Okay. Um, right. Well, good evening to all. And this follows on from part two with a bit more practical advice, as John said it would do. Um, Trying to get my clicker working. There, clicker's working. Okay. And as always, there's the um, please discuss dietary changes with your doctor, but I'll just move straight on to slide number 3. And you've seen this before, but I just want to reinforce it. Prioritize protein, control your carbs, and don't fear natural fats. And by natural fats, what I mean is fats which come from animals or fruits like olives or avocados. Um, Avoid fats that come from seeds. They are highly processed. Um, Now, this chart shows in terms of calories the percentage of carbs, fat, and protein in different food categories. Carbs are in red, fat in blue, and protein in green. So in order to get all these numbers, I looked up almost 50 different products, put them all into a spreadsheet and did the calculation. And I'm quite good at spreadsheets. Um, So the prepared meals that I selected are those that you just heat and eat, um, something you'd put in the microwave or the oven. And they do have a reasonable amount of protein, but they're still high in carbs and fat, which will be mostly fat from seed oils, unfortunately. And other processed foods are all high in carbs and generally low in protein. There are a lot of red bars on this chart for the processed food. And processed foods are also the most addictive foods, especially when mixed with fat and made so tasty that you keep coming back for more. And really, that means that the food scientists have done a good job and they've managed to achieve that bliss point. So in UK, this pie chart shows the NHS reference rates based on a 2000 kilocalorie per day. And you can see it's only 10% protein, but 58% carbs. And I'm going to suggest that 10% is far too low. And good studies have come out to say that it is far too low. But then if you have a look at the average for the processed meals, those processed meals that I had in the previous chart, which I mentioned, you can see that the macro distribution of fats, protein, and carbs is almost identical to the NHS reference rates. And I'm going to, why is this the case? Are the processed food manufacturers following the NHS reference rates? Or perhaps, excuse me, are the NHS reference rates following the processed food manufacturers? Or so I'll let you make up your mind on that one. So now the real food macros. You can see that meat and fish are mostly mostly protein and fat. And that's what comes naturally in food. Eggs, good amount of protein, a lot of fat in eggs as well, but it's all healthy fat. Milk and yogurt, these are all roughly equal proportions, not quite, a bit more fat, depends on which milks and fats you have. And then you get to the nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds there's a lot of fat in nuts and seeds, just, the plain, not ones which have been modified in any way. You'll see that green veg A lot of carbs, some protein in green veg. There is. Pulses, again, a lot of carbs, and there is also, as a proportion of the total calories, there is also a good amount of protein. Not so much in root veg. Root veg is mostly carbs and not enough protein. And fruit itself is pretty much all carbs. You have to eat an awful lot of fruit to get the required amount of protein in your diet. So these are my macros. This is roughly what I eat. 25% of my diet is protein, and that's made up mainly of eggs, meat, a little bit of fish. And when I say meat, I mean red and white meat as well. And the fat proportion is about 65%. I'm slightly guilty of drinking a lot of coffee with cream in it. That's right here. So I get a lot of my fat in cream. But those proportions seem to work very nicely for me. So I'm proud to say that on the Concept 2 rowing machine, indoor rowing machine, I held 2 world records for my age group, in the 70 to 79 age group. So eating that way seems to work for me. So how much protein do we need? I briefly talked about this in the last presentation, but this is just a summary. For women, because women are generally lighter, about 100 grams per day, men 120 grams per day, which is significantly more than the NHS recommend, I have to say, which you could put into 30 to 50 grams per meal. If you're only having 2 meals a day like I do, I tend to try and get probably 30 to 40 in the first meal of the day, and probably more than 60 in the second meal of the day, and maybe a few snacks which are sort of protein rich during the day. The importance of protein. This study in the Journal of American College of Nutrition, they put it quite plainly: dietary animal protein is the primary source of high biological value protein, iron, vitamin B12, folic acid, biotin, and other essential nutrients. The importance of dietary protein cannot be underestimated in the diet of older adults. And they put these as the inadequate protein intake contributes to these items here. I've highlighted the last 2, skeletal muscle and bone density. And I was recently listening to a podcast by Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who's an expert in protein. And she's forecasting an epidemic of osteoporosis, particularly amongst the elderly. As you get older, you shouldn't eat less protein, you should eat more. And all proteins are not created equal. Proteins are amino acids, and there are 9 essential amino acids, meaning we must consume them to stay healthy. And they have the score, the digestible indispensable amino acid score, DIAS, which has measured the quality of the proteins in various foods and given them a score. But on average, for meat, fish, and eggs, the score comes out to 1.11, and for vegetables, it comes out as 0.66. So you're getting a much less effective, or I don't know quite how to put it, but efficient protein if you're just relying on vegetables. And so when it comes to protein quality, whether we're examining the amino acid profile or the protein digestibility, the scientific data is very clear that animal proteins, pound for pound, are significantly superior to plant proteins. And a further study just confirmed this as well. I'll just read some of it. Older adults are recommended to consume an adequate amount of high quality dietary protein for the prevention of age-related muscle loss. We propose that a vegan diet increases the risk of inadequate protein intake at an older age. That's just coming around to say, get your protein from animal sources. They're much better. So getting into the bit which you all want to see, carbs, fat, and protein. How much is in the food that we eat? Here are some pictures. So for that breakfast there, bacon, eggs, sausages, you can see that it gives you 30 grams of protein, 31 grams of protein. For the just having more eggs, I've made a calculation. I've assumed how many eggs were in that scrambled eggs plate. And so there's definitely an adequate amount of protein in those bacon and eggs. And that's kind of what I have every day at lunchtime. Oh, excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. If you are snacking, then you can get some protein from your snacks, but you have to be careful about snacking because there's a lot of fat in snacking. And if you're trying to lose weight, snacking doesn't help. If you're trying to gain weight, perhaps this is the sort of snack that would be advantageous. Few more slides here, pictures. So a chicken dish there, which I've kind of guessed the weight of it, as I said, and that would have about 30 grams of protein and hardly any carbs in it. The egg salad there with some ham, again, adequate protein for a meal. The fish cakes as well, and the tuna and avocado salad. Something like that all has good amounts of protein in. And getting on to main meals, you know, a good steak, that would have sort of good 30 grams of protein. I've assumed the weight of that chicken, you know, 2 nice chicken breasts there, that's going to be high in protein. So if you want to get your protein in, chicken is a good way to do it. But then don't forget to have some fat with it as well. The beef stew I've based on a recipe that I cook and estimated what one sort of meal for myself would be. And again, the salmon there, a good meal as well to have, gets you enough protein in. So let's have a quick look at 5 a day. How many carbs, fat and protein in 5 a day? And perhaps you can, in your mind, just sort of guess. John and Bradley have seen this already. Perhaps they can remember. But here we go. Your 5 a day only has 6 grams of protein in it. Now these 5 examples here I took from an NHS video on YouTube. This is what they said. This is a suggestion from them. So I used their suggestion. I do note that there's 3 fruits in it and only 2 veg. So one could possibly get a bit more protein if you had 1 fruit and 4 veg. There's an interesting blog from Zoe Harcum the truth about 5 a day. Well worth reading if you want to know more about 5 a day. But essentially it says she doesn't know where the number 5 came from. There's no science behind it. Now, John and Bradley, you haven't seen this. This isn't a slide I added since I gave my presentation last month. I thought I'd try and calculate the cost of protein, because people say, but if you go on this diet, it's going to be expensive. And there's possibly some truth in that. I'm going to be honest, I've never done the exercise. I don't know if my food bills are more or less since I changed my diet. I'm going to guess that they're probably about the same, allowing for inflation. But this is interesting, just looking at the cost of, just looking at the cost of items which will have 30 grams of protein in. So how much milk, what cost of milk do you have to consume to get 30 grams of protein? And I did this exercise, put it all into my spreadsheets and got these calculations out. So milk is the cheapest form of protein, believe it or not. Eggs, I'm not surprised about eggs at all. They're high in protein and they're not very expensive. Milk, yogurt's obviously more expensive than milk. I've taken chicken breast there, and you can see it's right at the top of the list. You could if you bought a whole chicken, I'm sure that cost would go down per 30 grams of, and I've used 30 grams because it's a nice amount just to have at a meal. It's a good amount there. You can get a reasonable amount of protein in your pulses. You know, people say, oh, well, you know, if you want to get protein from veg, you know, have beans and other things like that. Potatoes have a reasonable amount of protein, believe it or not, as do rice, and they're not expensive. However, they are high in carbs, and therefore you have to eat an awful lot of them, and you're eating an awful lot of carbs to get your protein in. They're not very efficient when it comes to eating protein. They might be cheap, but they're not efficient. Strangely enough, breakfast cereals have a reasonable amount of protein per cost. This is all per cost. Cheese is a good thing. And then you get the sort of the red bars there with the, you know, the bread, pasta, prepared meals. I thought prepared meals would be a little cheaper per gram of protein, but they're not. They're reasonably high. And fish is quite expensive. You know, the cost of fish, and you certainly wouldn't want to go out and have your fish and chips and say, oh, fish is a good meal to have. Let's have fish and chips. Fish is a good meal to have if you cook it the right way. It's a great meal to have, but not deep fried with chips. And then the cost, if we go right down to the bottom of the chart, vegetables and fruit. To get your 30 grams of protein in, you have to eat an awful lot of green vegetables or fruit, and it would cost you an awful lot. So I'm not too sure how, I know there are people who are fruitarians and all they eat is fruit. They must either spend an awful lot of money try to get their protein in, or be severely protein deficient. I imagine they're severely protein deficient. So that's a sort of interesting table, which I've never seen anybody put anything quite like that together. So milk, eggs, meat, those are all cost-effective ways of getting your protein in. And all those ones which I've just put a star against, they do have carbs in. So they're cautionary note against all of those. Right, moving on. Last slide, almost the last slide of this part of it. I've got some food charts, which I'm going to open up, and then I have to share my screen again. This is an interesting bit as well. Hold on. Let me share. Okay, can you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
So these are food items for real food. This one, okay, and what it is, it's grams per 100 total 100 grams of the food item, right? So I've broken them down into categories. So vegetables, and I've used the same color coding as previously. Carbs, fat, carbs in red, fat in blue, protein in green. So you can see that vegetables are predominantly in the carbs category. There are things like chickpeas, you know, they do have protein in as well, lentils, beans, they all have that. And just moving up to fruit, and incidentally, you'll be able, John has put these on the website, the Thanet Diabetes Community website. They're already there. They're in PDF form, and you can print them out if you want. So fruit, you can see a lot of carbs. And then you get onto your snacks as well, which are sort of high in calories, essentially, these snacks. And then you get to the meat and fish and eggs, and they have a completely different look to them. There's the meat and fish and eggs are fat and protein, and that's what they are. They hardly, eggs have a tiny bit of carbs in. And remember, this is not in terms of calories. This is in terms of grams, just in terms of the weight of the protein in 100 grams of the food item, or the weight of the fat or carbs. And then that goes down to dairy as well. So you could, as I say, you can print these out. Right at the top, there's the scale. So that's in grams, that scale. And then the next food one, processed food. And you can see, to begin with, I've put in breakfast cereals, then going down to biscuits and etc., and chocolates. They're all carbs. They're predominantly carbs. And if you move on, there's some of the prepared meals, and all of those prepared meals, those are the ones that I've used in the previous charts as well in my calculations. It gives an interesting view of it all. But if you are thinking of having processed food, have a look at this chart first. print them out. I would recommend that. This is just going back to the real food items. And then one can see right down at the bottom there, to me, the healthiest foods are those meat, fish, and eggs, also dairy if one tolerates dairy. Right, thank you very much. I think that completes what I have to say.